Omoyele Sowore has never been one to hide his words. When he speaks, it is often sharp, direct, and unsettling for those in power. And this time, his message is not about the court process or secret meetings, it is about fear. He says Bola Ahmed Tinubu is afraid of one thing above all others, the release of Nnamdi Kanu. According to Sowore, this fear runs deeper than politics. It is not just about the noise of protests or the headlines that may follow. It is about control, and what might happen if that control slips from the hands of the presidency. Sowore explains that every government has something it cannot manage easily, something that keeps it awake at night. For the Tinubu administration, that thing is Nnamdi Kanu's freedom. The moment he walks out of detention, Sowore says, the balance of power in Nigeria's political conversation will shift instantly. He describes Tinubu's fear as a mix of political survival and public image. The president, he says, understands that Kanu is not just a man but a movement. Over the years, Kanu has become a symbol that many people in the southeast, and beyond, have attached their frustrations to. Whether they agree with his methods or not, he has come to represent something that the system has never been able to silence completely. Sowore says Tinubu knows this. He knows that Kanu's voice outside prison walls could wake up emotions the government has worked hard to keep calm. The rallies, the chants, the renewed demand for justice, all of these are things the current administration cannot afford right now. But the fear, Sowore insists, is not only about protest or unrest. It is also about truth. He believes that Nnamdi Kanu has information, stories, and facts that could embarrass some of the most powerful people in Nigeria. The kind of truths that were buried under years of propaganda and half-told stories. Releasing him, Sowore says, would mean giving him a microphone that cannot be turned off. He describes the current government as one that wants to control every narrative. From the economy to national unity, everything must go through an official explanation. But Kanu's release would bring an alternative voice, loud, confident, and impossible to predict. That is what scares them the most. Sowore said that when people fear the truth, they try to bury the messenger. That is why, according to him, Kanu's detention has gone from being a legal matter to a political insurance policy. The government believes that as long as he is kept in custody, they can manage the country's temperature. But once he is out, they lose that control. Sowore also points out another layer to Tinubu's fear, the fear of political backlash. Within the ruling elite, there are divided opinions. Some believe Kanu's release would make Tinubu appear weak before certain northern power blocs who view Kanu as a threat to national unity. Others believe that continuing to detain him makes Tinubu look like an enemy of justice and peace. So, the president is caught in a trap of his own politics: release Kanu and risk losing political support, or keep him detained and risk losing moral authority. Either way, he loses something. Sowore says this is what fear does to leaders: it locks them between pride and panic. He adds that this fear is not new. Every administration that has faced a strong voice of opposition has tried to suppress it rather than face it. From military juntas to democratic governments, the pattern is the same. They all believe that silence equals stability. But history, Sowore says, has proven them wrong every single time. He argues that Tinubu's government has underestimated one thing: ideas do not die in detention. He says that even while locked up, Kanu's influence has grown. His image has become stronger, and his name has turned into a cause that unites those who feel forgotten by the state. That, according to Sowore, is the kind of influence that frightens any government that survives on control. Sowore's voice carries both anger and clarity as he speaks. He says Nigeria has reached a point where truth itself is treated as a threat, and freedom has become something the powerful decide, not the courts. He calls it a tragedy of leadership, a fear that pretends to be order, a silence that hides behind the word security. He ends his first warning simply: Tinubu's greatest fear is not Nnamdi Kanu's words, but what those words might inspire in the people. Because once a voice like that is free, the nation begins to listen again, and when people start to listen, power begins to shake. Sowore says this fear didn't begin overnight. It was not born in a single meeting or after one statement. It began slowly, quietly, deep inside the system, the day the government realized that Nnamdi Kanu's influence was not only about Biafra, but about the larger question of freedom itself. According to Sowore, from the moment Kanu's detention dragged beyond its first year, security reports started warning the presidency about a growing undercurrent in the southeast. It was not just anger anymore, it was conviction. People no longer saw Kanu as just a separatist, they began to see him as a symbol of resistance, a man standing alone against the full weight of the state. Sowore explains that such symbolism is dangerous for any administration that thrives on image control. In politics, perception is power, and Kanu's story, the arrests, the trials, the defiance, built a perception that inspired many. It painted him as the man who refused to bow, and that, Sowore says, is something the government could not tolerate. Tinubu's advisors, according to Sowore, started to treat Kanu's case as more than a legal matter. They began to view it as a political time bomb. Reports were drafted, strategies drawn up, and new talking points created to make sure the narrative stayed under control. But the truth is, behind the closed doors of power, there was panic. Sowore says that fear grew stronger after the 2023 elections. Tinubu came into office already facing questions about legitimacy, unity, and trust. The last thing his administration needed was a loud reminder of injustice sitting at the heart of the country. Kanu's continued detention, though controversial, became a shield, a way to show strength and avoid appearing weak before his political rivals. But Sowore insists that the government's fear is misplaced. He says that real power does not come from locking people up, but from confronting the truth they represent. By keeping Kanu in detention, Tinubu has turned him into a global figure, someone discussed not only in Nigeria but across the world. Behind every statement from government officials, Sowore says, lies an unspoken worry: what if he speaks again? That question has haunted every discussion about Kanu's case. Because when Nnamdi Kanu speaks, people listen, and when people listen, narratives change. Sowore claims that within the intelligence circle, there is deep disagreement. Some officers believe Kanu's release would calm the region, others believe it would ignite it. But what binds them all together is fear, the fear of unpredictability. The government does not know what Kanu will say or do next, and that uncertainty is what they cannot control. Sowore says fear is the seed of oppression. It makes governments act before thinking. It turns justice into a political calculation. That is exactly what is happening now. The same system that should be guided by law has allowed fear to guide its judgment. Instead of asking, what is right, they ask, what is safe for power? He recalls how every leader who ruled through fear eventually faced the same outcome: loss of trust. People can be silent for a while, but silence does not mean agreement. It only means waiting. And when they stop waiting, no power can stop them. Sowore believes Tinubu's government is now repeating the same cycle that others did before him. He says instead of seeing Kanu's release as a step toward healing the country, they see it as a risk. Instead of dialogue, they choose denial. Instead of leadership, they choose intimidation. He also reveals that certain top figures in government quietly fear that releasing Kanu would expose secrets about how deeply the Nigerian system mishandled the Southeast issue. The region's sense of exclusion, the militarization of peaceful zones, the economic neglect, all of these are truths that could resurface once Kanu regains his voice. And that, according to Sowore, is what terrifies them the most. Sowore's tone becomes heavy when he says this: a government that fears the truth will always end up fearing its own people. He believes Tinubu's administration is now living in that stage, afraid of the reaction, afraid of the people, afraid of the questions that might come next. He calls it a dangerous kind of fear, one that makes leaders see peace as a threat and justice as a weakness. He says this fear has now shaped everything around Kanu's trial, from the courtroom atmosphere to the language of official statements. Every move, every press release, every delay, all of it is guided by that same hidden emotion. By the end of his explanation, Sowore leaves his audience with a thought that lingers: fear may protect power for a season, but it destroys legitimacy forever. And once people lose faith in justice, they stop believing in leadership. That, he says, is the root of Tinubu's fear, not Nnamdi Kanu himself, but the truth his release might unleash. Because truth has no master, and once it escapes, it can't be caged again. Sowore begins the final part of his revelation with a calm but heavy voice. He says that what Nigeria is facing right now is not just a legal or political situation, it is a moral test. It is a moment that will define how history remembers those in power. He warns that when fear becomes the foundation of governance, everything else starts to crumble quietly, piece by piece, until only chaos is left. According to him, Tinubu's government is standing at a dangerous crossroads. On one side lies justice, the hard, uncomfortable truth that Nnamdi Kanu deserves a fair and transparent resolution. On the other side lies fear, the easier path of continued detention, silence, and propaganda. And right now, Sowore says, the government seems to be walking deeper into the path of fear. He warns that this path has consequences, not only for Kanu but for the country itself. History, he reminds, has shown again and again that injustice always breeds unrest. When people feel unheard, they do not disappear, they only grow quieter until their silence turns into a louder explosion. Sowore believes that by keeping Kanu in detention, the government is not solving a problem, it is feeding it. Every day that passes without justice, resentment deepens. Every court delay, every contradictory statement from officials, every secret meeting only strengthens the belief that the system is afraid of the truth. And when the people begin to believe that justice no longer exists, they begin to lose faith in peace. He recalls how Nigeria once walked a similar road in the 1990s, when fear ruled every decision. Leaders back then believed that by silencing dissent, they could keep the nation stable. But that silence became fuel for resistance, and the fire that came afterward consumed everything they tried to protect. Sowore warns that this same history could repeat itself, not with guns, but with disillusionment, distrust, and division. He says Tinubu's fear of releasing Kanu has become a symbol of something larger, a government trapped by its own insecurity. It no longer fears the man, it fears what he represents, accountability. Because once Kanu is free, questions will follow. Why was he really detained for so long? Who ordered the raids, the arrests, the deaths? What laws were bent in the process? Those questions, Sowore says, will come, and the answers will shake the comfort of power. Sowore explains that the greatest danger for any leader is to mistake silence for stability. A quiet people are not always a loyal people. Sometimes they are only waiting, watching, until the right moment comes. He warns that no administration can suppress truth forever. It may delay it, disguise it, or distract from it, but eventually, it returns, louder and clearer than before. He says the world is watching Nigeria again, just as it did decades ago. The detention of Nnamdi Kanu has become more than a national issue, it is now an international symbol of how Africa handles dissent and justice. Foreign observers, Sowore adds, are not blind to what is happening. They see the pattern, the pressure, and the politics behind the courtrooms. Sowore's tone turns solemn as he gives his final warning: if a government builds its strength on fear, it will eventually collapse under its own shadow. He says the Tinubu administration still has a chance to make the right decision, to prove that leadership can rise above fear. But every day of delay pushes Nigeria closer to the edge. He argues that releasing Nnamdi Kanu would not weaken Tinubu, it would redefine him. It would show that the president has enough confidence to face the truth, enough courage to correct a system that has gone too far. It would send a message that Nigeria can still rise above its old habits of suppression. But Sowore is not naive. He knows that power rarely listens until it is forced to. That is why he calls on Nigerians to stay alert, to stay informed, and to speak when silence becomes dangerous. He says this moment is not just about Kanu's freedom, but about the kind of country Nigeria wants to be, one ruled by fear, or one guided by justice. As he concludes, Sowore's words cut through the tension like a final warning: fear cannot govern forever. It creates enemies where there were none. It turns the truth into a threat and makes leadership blind. But no wall built on fear ever stands forever. He pauses, then says quietly, Nnamdi Kanu's freedom is not just about one man, it is about whether Nigeria is ready to face its conscience. The air hangs still after his words. It is not anger that remains, but a deep, heavy truth, a truth that cannot be unseen, a truth that leaves both the rulers and the ruled with one haunting question: if justice can be delayed for one man, who will be safe tomorrow? And with that, Sowore's warning stands as both prophecy and challenge to a nation trembling between courage and fear.